At Fall River Property Management, we hate evictions, so we've gotten really good at collecting rent. However, we understand that evictions are a necessary part of managing property, so we want to use our knowledge and expertise to help educate the landlords in our service area so that they can be successful in the eviction process if and when they need it. Rent is due on the 1st. But many of our tenants are on a fixed income and they get their money on the 3rd, so we begin our collections process on the 5th. We call our collections process the collections pipeline. When tenants are in the collections pipeline, they get daily phone calls and emails offering an opportunity to discuss their rent, come up with a satisfactory payment arrangement, or submit a housing assistance application. Our years of experience has taught us that better to collect rent than to go through the evictions process. Fun fact, in the state of Massachusetts, a tenant cannot be evicted if they are applying for raft. You must accept all monies and any judicial proceedings will be dismissed once you do so. So what happens when a tenant applies for raft? They'll submit their information and their income, and raft will then ask us for a W-9, proof of ownership, the tenant's ledger, and a copy of their lease if they have one. Raft will pay up to $10,000 in any 12-month period for a qualifying tenant. FRPM has collected over $500,000 in Raft funds on behalf of our clients. On day 10 after rent is due, a 14-day notice is served via constable. The 14-day notice is the first official step in the eviction process. It's very important that a 14-day notice is served by a constable. If the constable serves the notice, they'll be able to provide proof of service, which is important in the case that there's an eviction. So what exactly is a 14-day notice? It basically means that the tenant has 14 days to pay or move. At the end of that time period, the owner can file for an eviction. So let's take a step back and look at the process of eviction. The first thing that is sent is the 14-day notice to quit. After the 14-day notice time period has expired, the attorney can file a summary process complaint. This is the first official filing with the court. The 14-day notice itself isn't recorded with the court and isn't on the tenant's permanent record unless an eviction is actually filed. So once the eviction is filed, the court will issue a date for mediation, and then the tenant and attorney are notified via mail. It's been my experience that most evictions are settled in mediation. You can leave mediation with a stipulation agreement, which is documentation that the tenant is required to make on-time payments for a predetermined amount of time. And you can bring the tenant back to court if they fail to make those payments. You could also agree on a move-out date in mediation. But if the parties don't agree on the terms, the trial will be scheduled for a later date. So what happens if your tenant doesn't show up to court? Believe it or not, this happens pretty often. In this case, the court will issue a default judgment against the tenant for the full amount of rent owed and will issue an execution after a short waiting period. An execution is a document issued by the court which can be used by a constable for forcible removal. If the constable uses an execution, there'll be a 48-hour warning issued in which the tenant must move all personal belongings out of the property before a moving truck shows up and does it for them. In this case, the landlord has certain obligations. They must pay for the moving company to get all the belongings out, and they also have to pay for storage for up to 6 months for the belongings. So after mediation, you might end up with a judgment, a stipulation agreement, a move-out date, or another court date. Sometimes you can negotiate the rent due to help with moving expenses and get a faster move-out. In the event that you're not able to come to an agreement in mediation and you do go to trial, you'll end up coming back to court at a later date. This could take up to a month. During this time, your tenant's probably not paying rent, which is why it's important to come to an agreement with the tenant during mediation. Once you go to trial, it's not unheard of for a judge to say they'll take the case under advisement and issue a decision at a later date. I've seen this final decision take as long as 6 weeks and then award a tenant another 3 months. Regardless of the outcome, evictions are expensive. This is why good tenant placement is the most important thing. But if you're unable to collect rent from your tenant, our hope is that this video will help you to have an intelligent conversation with your attorney as you plan for your upcoming eviction.